So that will no doubt notify you on your various devices. Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining our call today. I should say firstly, for anyone that was looking in vain in their inbox for the notes of last week's call and the recording of Eldridge's presentation, my apologies, you haven't missed the email. I haven't sent it yet. I haven't quite finished the notes, which I will do later on today. So you'll find that in your inbox shortly. Right, so for the call today, there are in fact three things that I thought it would be useful to discuss. So for those of you that have been looking at your email, you hopefully would have seen a note that I sent out a short while ago highlighting two of those topics. And if my PC wakes up, I will even attempt to just put that, share that with you if I may. Oh, there we are. Right. Just slightly slowly at just the wrong moment. Right, so what I thought it'd be useful just to touch on briefly, Forrester put out a report, a little bit of background, oh thank you for muting whoever did that. Forrester put out a report a couple of weeks back about the impact of TLS 1.3 and DOE on enterprise monitoring. And then in the last week or so, there were reports that Chinese sensors have been blocking TLS 1.3 connections, effectively stopping people in China from using DOE to hide their DNS lookups. So sort of two sides of the same coin, I guess. One, the sort of Chinese sensors stopping the use of encrypted DNS and TLS 1.3 to enable censorship, as opposed to Forrester highlighting the difficulties that could be posed to enterprise sort of network operators in terms of being able to monitor the sort of network traffic. So in both cases, for different reasons, giving DOE a bad press, or giving encrypted DNS more broadly a bad press. For those of you that have had an opportunity to review either of or both of those stories, because I had a couple of people emailing me through the last week on both of those, I wondered if you had any reflections on either of them that people thought would be useful just to share on the call.
Can I ask a clarification, Andrew?
Of course you can, Brian.
I believe that blocking was only when it was using encrypted hello, or not?
Actually, that's a good point. It did specifically, where it to be pedantic, the article I think referred to encrypted eSNI, but let's assume it meant encrypted client hello. But yes, you're right. It did mention on the censorship side, it was both TLS 1.3 and encrypted client hello referenced in the same breath. To be fair, I think it was unclear whether they were trying to block them individually or only when paired.
Yeah, I think that the Chinese are not very good about publishing their policies, unfortunately. So you kind of going to have to take it with a pinch of salt. I mean, I think people who've studied this in detail, it's not always entirely consistent, and it can vary from location in China and what mood they seem to be in, what precisely the policy is. So I think that you probably need to read this at a very loose level.
Yeah. And that is a fair point, Ian, that maybe the policies aren't necessarily published widely on that particular point.
Well, and the other side of the coin is, you know, how widely the TLS 1.3 with ECH is deployed. The only major deployment I know of to date is Cloudflare. So was this another way of saying that in some regions of China, Cloudflare was being blocked?
I suppose that's the implication, in all fairness, isn't it? Yeah, I hadn't thought of Cloudflare being a particular victim of that, but you're absolutely right. That would be
well, there was an earlier report at one of the DNS ORC where they said pretty much DNS over HTTPS is already blocked 99% in China anyway. So, I mean, even before that came out, because they just know the kind of end targets and block it, or do the usual China firewall thing Sandra said.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is why I asked. I think the main target of the blocking is if they can't find out the host name from the server name indicator, then they're blocking the traffic. So if you're using TLS 1.3, but you're sending your eSNI in the clear, then you're less likely to get blocked, I think. But obviously, we don't know for definite, but that was the gist that I understood from the reports.
I'm sure that Glenn, after he stopped off in Hawaii, could continue traveling and maybe do a field test in China just by extending his flight slightly.
No.
You're not so keen on that leg of the journey, by the sound of it, then.
Well, China's fine. I won't take any devices in that could actually do these things to do the test. I won't bring devices like that into China. So
probably wise.
I'm paranoid.
But the important thing here is if they want to be able to block DOH, but they need to know the host name that you're talking to be able to do that. And so if they can't find out the host name, they just block it by default. That was my understanding.
Yeah.
So I'm also wondering, how much, the couple times we've poked at sort of trying to get some data about the prevalence of TLS 1.3 in production on the internet, it's still relatively low compared to 1.2.
Yeah.
And part of that, that's because you in some application environments have to take extra steps to turn it on, or in some others it's simply not enabled yet. So it's still sort of a work in progress, rolling out wise.
So I'm wondering whether it might be useful if I asked our good friend Jeff Huston if he has any useful stats on, in fact, both of those points then. Both the adoption of TLS 1.3, but also whether any of his testing extends into China. I presume it does, but I don't know that.
That would be interesting. Although I'm trying to remember from the way Jeff does his test, if he's able to see if it's the details of the TLS connection or not. I can't remember. Does anybody know?
I think I know. I don't think he does any kind of measurements for that right now, Glenn. It's more from the point of view of identifying source addresses, and I think he's got some hooks for checking how DNSSEC validation is being done by having web pages that will fail in various ways if the validation doesn't work. I suppose you could be extending that to look at TLS 1.3, but he's not looking at stuff like HTTP connections all that much. It's mostly DNS traffic he's looking at. I could have a word
right.
Who thinks about that.
Yeah. As you say, Jim, even if he's not doing it now, maybe he could extend it slightly with his ever-flexible tool.
Yeah.
I'm conscious we focus on the more interesting of the two sort of stories in many respects, the sort of Chinese component. Did anyone take a look at the Forrester sort of piece on the impact on enterprise monitoring, which, as I say, I read them as two halves of the same coin in many respects. So.
Not really. I think it's just statements of bleeding obvious.
Yeah.
Yeah, we tend to agree with that.
Can be said for the Forrester thing, I think, is that perhaps this will get more visibility of the issues around DoH in enterprise networks, because you could imagine the CTOs and the CIOs and Fortune 500 companies will be reading Forrester reports. They will certainly not be reading IETF mailing lists.
In fact, if you're thinking of the main IHF mailing list, the circulation has dropped slightly in the last week anyway, but that's a whole different discussion. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, Jim, that it certainly takes it to a more mainstream audience, albeit slightly belatedly, but that's certainly a good thing. Paul, were you trying to come in there?
Yeah, I think it's. I think in both cases they have the ability to affect the adoption rates, right? And when the adoption oftentimes is forced by the browser makers, right? For these standards is when you start getting that red icon that says, or even the almost impossible, hold down control and turn your head just right to get to this unencrypted or this poorly encrypted site again. Their ability to put those enforcements in is going to have to be altered. And I wonder if they're just going to try to do, geographic blocks to get around that. In other words, so the standard won't be as strong in China, but if you're anywhere else, then maybe you still get the big red warning icon when you go to a weaker encrypted site.
Yeah.
But to me, as much as anything, that may greatly, I strongly suspect this is going to greatly delay the rollout of them in general.
Because I mean, given that it's more your space, I guess, Paul, in terms of what Infoblox does, sort of playing potentially into the enterprise sort of space with some of this stuff. Are you seeing a great deal of interest in encrypted DNS and its implications with sort of CISOs and others, or is it still rather early for that yet?
It is still pretty early. We do not see, I'm hoping with this Forrester report, I really had hoped to see a lot more interest from the enterprise side than we've seen, but it's been primarily on the service provider side where we see a lot of interest and concern around this. The enterprises still seem to be rather ignorant of it. I suspect the Apple change, as much as anything, will make the biggest impact on them. The applications, if you don't have an encrypted DNS server specified in the, at the OS or user configured level, it falling down to app control will have a bigger impact than most other changes.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
I think we're also going to be missing, Andrew. A lot of the CISO space gets a lot of their information when they go to events like First, and they're sort of industry conferences where they, a lot of people do presentations on these things, both from the consultancy side, but from the security operator side. And I think that right now with COVID going on, that's probably going to really, really impact their ability to get their knowledge shared amongst their community until somebody starts maybe writing some articles. So maybe, things like Gartner will help, or Forrester, but it's going to be a little slower than it would have been pre-pandemic.
Yeah, that's a very fair point. Actually, I hadn't thought of that, but yeah, you're absolutely right. With far less prevalence of conferences, even virtual ones, it will slow down on information flows. Anyone else? I see Brian's helpfully put some a stat in the chat that TLS 1.3 adoption on Chrome was 30% last December. I'm sure it's gone up a bit since then, but so that's a helpful data point at least for that. But I will reach out to Jeff after this call and see if he has any more current data on that, and also if he has or is able to get any sort of visibility of what's happening in China through his very creative system with Google Ads. Sorry, Jim.
Akamai or Cloudflare on this call?
Certainly Akamai. Well, Ralph is very definitely on the call.
Oh, yes. Yeah, I think I'll put Ralph on the spot. Okay, Ralph's a DNS guy, but Ralph, how much
I know nothing about HTTP.
How much of Akamai's web is doing TLS 1.3?
To be honest, I know the people I can ask, but I cannot tell you from kind of right at the top of my head.
Yeah, is it any chance you find that out?
I would, but I certainly would think we have it out already. Yeah, I mean,
No,
again,
could you find out how much?
Don't quote me on that. I mean, again,
Yeah,
that
really.
is stuff that it's a big company.
Of course, Rob. But if you could find out how much that's been used, I think it's important to look at what's happening on the supply side as well as the demand side from the browsers. We need to know what level of penetration TLS 1.3 has achieved on websites and on hosting providers, especially the big ones such as yourselves and Cloudflare.
Yeah, I can ask.
I can comment that, you know, I've got hundreds of servers I'd like to put encrypted client hello on, but it's not easy for me to do it yet, so I haven't. Right. And I suspect a lot of people are in a similar position.
Well, if anyone is aware of any stats on that, that'd be very helpful. I see John has also put some additional info on the chat. So Quad 9, as you would expect, is nearly 100% on 1.3.
And never ask me a real stat when we're on a live call, because then I lose the next 5 minutes typing stuff into Grafana. Yeah, everything does look to be on 1.3, but there is actually some that is not on 1.3. Very small amount that is not on 1.3. So I have to figure out where that's coming from. That's an interesting outlier.
Yeah.
And then nothing on TLS on 1.1. So 0 as I hoped it would be.
Yeah, and for clarity, in case anyone can't read the chat, that's in terms of DOE traffic.
Yes, DOE only. Yeah.
Not all of Quad 9's traffic. Brilliant. Okay. All right. Well, let's see if we can fill in any additional gaps afterwards. But it does just sort of finishing the point on the enterprise side. It does highlight, I think, the thing which has been maybe lacking, which is this education of would-be end users, because I think there's a big knowledge gap between the sort of the debate in the ITF and the rest of the world in terms of things like encrypted DNS, ACH, etc.
Is there anyone that we know of that's currently marketing a DOH packet inspection or 1.3 packet inspection? That you know, my prediction is that there's going to be a very large market that develops around this new technology model, and it would be interesting to find when the first signs of that start to appear.
Well, we did have Luca Dera way back in June gave us a presentation on DPI. Right,
but he's not marketing it. I'm looking for like a vendor who's trying to sell this to companies, because that's going to basically, they're going to be, my opinion is that they will be at the forefront of leading the fear, uncertainty, and doubt contingent, because they're trying to sell their product. And so there's a snowball effect there with when you start to get people who have a vested interest in frightening people about encryption.
Anyone aware of any vendors currently active in the space?
Palo Alto. I'm under the impression they could do the inspection, and Googled a quick article on that. But that was effectively for devices that they had some level of certificate visibility into.
Yeah. So again, still early days in the marketplace then, by the sound of it.
Can I return the conversation to China? So, because when this Great Firewall blocking occurred, it appears it was discussed in the TLS working group list, and I don't follow that list very much, but one of the comments was, yes, we know this is a problem because the encrypted eSNI or encrypted client hello has a particular extension field, and you can look for that extension. But the aim at the time they designed that was they were hoping that ECH would just be widespread. It would be 99% of the traffic, and therefore it's no longer feasible to just block it every time you see it. So it may be that the conclusion of the working group is, well, that's the way it should be. We just need to encourage adoption, just like adoption of TLS itself was encouraged. So that could be the way it's going to go, unless there is a magic way to embed ECH without flagging it on the outside.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, Chris, because I think that was also the logic with potentially sort of pushing content onto CDNs with ECH, as you say, sort of safety by being in the crowd rather than standing out.
Yes.
Yeah, so potentially it's a timing thing. But whether, of course, the fact that they're blocking it dissuades people from putting content or activating ECH, I guess will remain to be seen over the coming months.
I just think it probably won't dissuade people outside China. Yeah.
No, and to be honest, I think people inside China that care about this stuff will be using all sorts of tunneling already to get around the firewall restrictions anyway. I have a funny story to tell you about that. I had the misfortune to go to a meeting in China a couple of years ago, and the local hosts were giving us a day out, an excursion, and we're all in these buses, and we had a Chinese guy as our tour guide, and he started talking about all the things that you could get around in China using VPN. So yeah, we can get to Facebook, yeah, we can get to Google, no problem, blah, 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 blah. He disappeared halfway through the tour. We don't know what happened to him.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm told that VPNs are sort of standard use as you would expect, although of course a lot of VPNs are blocked as well. But also it's some of the coverage of this sort of particular story referenced that use of browsers in China is relatively rare even. So
my experience of living in China for about a month was there's local apps for everything. You don't need to work around the firewall. Like as a foreigner going there and you're like, why don't I have the things I'm used to? Yeah. But as a local, they've got the things they're used to and they don't need to work around anything to get what they are used to.
Yeah, if you're using WeChat and WePay and so on, not really a problem.
Exactly. And there's so much, China censorship is something that we all kind of a bit, don't like that. But, there's so much good technology in China. They don't often need to work around the censorship.
Well, it will be academic soon when we're all using TikTok, but that's a different story. Okay, any other thoughts on that before we move on? Take the silence as no. I'm hoping that Andy Fiddler is back on because he had a technical problem partway through.
Hi, Andrew. Yes, I'm back on. Yeah.
Yeah. Excellent. I asked Andy, who gave a presentation. This is on a sort of an adjoining area, but Andy gave a presentation at UK North a few weeks back on MAC randomisation, as you can see, as it appears on our respective screens. So given it also sort of touches on sort of the sort of privacy as well, I asked Andy if he wouldn't mind just briefly reprising that. Well, and I have to say, with my apologies to Andy, when I asked him, I hadn't realised he was sort of only back from holiday today after sort of 2 weeks vacation, so I hope this isn't too rusty, Andy, in presenting it. Probably seems like a long time ago,
Yeah.
but yeah, if you wouldn't mind doing a quick reprise of that, that would be much appreciated.
No problem. Can everyone see the slides okay?
Yeah, it's on the screen.
Okay, so I'm sure we all on this call know about MAC addresses, so I won't dwell on too much of the background to them, apart from that they're all standardized by the IEEE, and MAC addresses are visible unencrypted in Wi-Fi polling and connection handshakes. And to enhance privacy, IEEE application and operating systems have started to introduce various forms of randomization. And like other internet protocols, and here's a similarity with our favorite topics of DNS and DOE, ISPs have come to rely on MAC addresses for wider uses related to customer experience, e.g. automatic Wi-Fi connection, access control, and customer support applications and troubleshooting. So during this presentation, I'm going to be outlining some thoughts on how we can balance MAC address randomization privacy features with the potential unintended consequences on the network and customer experience. So, just quickly moving through the many forms and evolution of MAC address randomization. The first slide, which I'm showing now, covers the original approach. So here we have no randomization, with devices always using the same permanent MAC address for both Wi-Fi polling and probe requests. So there's no privacy through randomization, and clearly no impact to ISPs. Then on the next slide, I'm showing the first phase of evolution. And this first phase was for some devices to start to randomize their MAC addresses for probe requests only. So when they probe the Wi-Fi networks, they would use random MAC addresses each time for added privacy. But he only offers some privacy because when they connect to the access points, they will still use their permanent MAC address. So again, there's no impact to the ISPs. Then we've got the next phase. The second phase of evolution was for some devices to randomize MAC addresses for probe requests, but also for added privacy on a connection basis, but only on a per SSID realm basis, and always reuse that same randomized MAC address for subsequent connections to that SSID. So for example, if I'm connecting to a home hub SSID, then some devices will create a random MAC address, but then repeatedly use this random MAC address for all connections to just that SSID. And this gives more privacy, but still no impact to the ISPs, because always the same MAC address is always used for the same connection. Now we come on to the latest and more interesting stage of the evolution, where here we're talking about potential randomizing connection of MAC addresses on a per session basis or a daily basis for full privacy, meaning that if I connect to BT Wi-Fi tomorrow, I could have a different MAC address of that today. And it's interesting, Tommy's on the call, so it'd be great to hear Tommy's comment, but I understand looking at Microsoft Windows 10, they have an option at the moment to randomize MAC addresses in Wi-Fi network settings, allowing off, on, or change daily options. Apple also made announcements at their recent worldwide development conference on iOS 14 plans around private Wi-Fi. And I believe they were originally looking to do things around daily randomization. However, I understand, again, in the public domain, I would encourage you to all check the Beta 4 development release notes. I understand that they may have changed their plans and are now taking a more approach which reflects what other operating systems are doing and not doing this full level of randomization on a daily basis. But I think it's still useful for us to have this conversation, because obviously that position may change in the future. So the key message here is yes, this latest phase of evolution maximizes privacy, but like DOE, it could create unintended consequences for ISPs in terms of hotspot seamless MAC authentication, where your customer registers once on a public Wi-Fi, that public Wi-Fi provider remembers their MAC address and then seamlessly allows them to connect next time they connect to that hotspot. It could also impact the way broadband ISPs do time of day access controls, a form of parental controls. It could impact also if device-based parental controls use MAC address to uniquely identify a device. For example, the ability to have different parental controls for my device compared to my son's device. And naturally, it will also impact regulatory obligations. So moving on the next slide, here this focuses on the key impacts for ISPs and network operators to consider from MAC randomization. The first one is if you offer public Wi-Fi hotspots and use MAC authentication to offer seamless connectivity for subsequent visits, this capability potentially breaks with MAC randomization, and your customers will see a different experience. They have to re-register. One potential mitigation option here is to move to the use of Wi-Fi Passpoint 802.1x, but this will require additional user interaction in terms of installing that profile. The second one is if you use device MAC address for a broadband home device troubleshooting or Wi-Fi diagnostics, then this too could be impacted. Potential mitigation options here are the use of longer-term IEEE 802.11 physical layer identifiers or Wi-Fi Alliance certified Easy Connect. Also, if you offer time-of-day internet access controls or parental controls based on device MAC address, these too will be impacted, and alternative solutions will be required. Lastly, the current wider question I've got here is the focus at the moment is on laptops, tablets, and smartphones. But what about the impact to IoT devices going forward? So the next slide really was to say, if you're interested by this and want to engage more, what are the key background materials? The first one, if you want a history onto the background to MAC randomization, have a look at the documentation from the IEEE RCM TIG working group. In terms of latest Apple and Microsoft information, I've included links there for Microsoft's current capabilities and the public domain information from the Apple Worldwide Developer Congress. I need to update these slides to reflect the latest position, the revised Apple position. I'd encourage people from an ISP and network operator perspective to step back, identify what services and support dependencies you have on MAC addresses and what mitigation options do you need to consider. I also understand the IEEE 802.11 task group is starting to see, could they form a new group to cover MAC randomization and further Wi-Fi security aspects, taking it to the next level? And there's some discussions kicking off on that, so I'd encourage people to take a look at that and get involved. And lastly, talk to your operating system contacts about this. And I think we probably covered this one because this slide was just really again for UK North. It was just to call out the recent DNS over HTTPS developments coming out of the Apple Developer Conference as well, and also to call out the IETF encrypted client hello work, and just reminding people both of these will continue to have impact and unintended consequences to ISPs, packet inspection and parental controls. So in conclusion, BT looks favourably upon new capabilities that enhance privacy and security for our customers. However, whilst increasing privacy, further MAC randomization risks are creating unintended consequences to customer experience and support. For example, impact of public hotspots, seamless MAC authentication, time of day access controls, device-based parental controls, and regulatory obligations. In a similar way, encrypted DNS and ECH privacy comes with impacts to existing content filtering, zero rating, and customer support capabilities. So as always, Chris and I would welcome continued industry dialogue on balancing these privacy features emerging with the unintended consequences on network and customer experience. And the only other one I would note is in terms of Apple's iOS 14 aspects around private Wi-Fi, this reflection again that I understand there's been developments in beta 4, so I believe the position has changed. So I would encourage people to take a look at that. And that was a quick overview. Any questions?
And I should say, I've put a link in the chat, which I think is a more recent Apple info. Just to compliment what Andy just covered.
Yeah, I have a quick question. What is the regulatory obligations that you're referring to?
I was referring here to the data retention responsibilities that UK ISPs have. So if there's a requirement for us to store information around device MAC address, then we can then store only what information ISPs have.
Okay. Thank you.
I
So
can
it's
give you an
probably-
example of that with hotspots in the UK or public wireless networks. You're required to know who is using them. So if they commit a crime while they're on the hotspot in a cafe, for example, then you can pass that information over to the police. And sometimes that takes the form of a MAC address of the device.
How long do you have to hold that information?
I don't know off the top of my head.
I don't either off the top of my head, no.
Curious. Interesting.
But I know someone who got arrested because they were running a public Wi-Fi that didn't hold that information. So it's taken quite seriously.
Very good question. Thanks, Jason. Anyone else with any questions on that?
There's a really well done summary of that and the impacts. That's super helpful. I'm assuming this was published publicly on the UK NOF details.
Yes, it's on UK NOF site. The slides are on there. I think they're still yet to let Andrew correct me, as I don't think they've published yet the video recording of it.
Oh, I don't think they have. They hadn't the last time I checked.
No, I checked, last week, and they hadn't. No.
But I'll put out a link, and a copy, obviously, of the presentation after this call, Paul, if that's of interest.
And also, Chris Spencer from Global Reach is doing an excellent blog on his on this as well, and Andrew's included the link on this as well. And Chris covers in his blog the latest position from Apple.
Yeah, so that link's in the chat already if that's of interest to anyone. It's currently at the bottom of the chat, rather helpfully, so easy to find.
Yeah, this would affect consumer systems as well, like the Circle parental control system. I have a lot of friends who use that to keep their kids safe at home and aren't using, a service provider provided system, but those things are generally keyed off MAC addresses. Google's Wi-Fi system will be affected similarly, as it, I use time of day policies via Google Wi-Fi to keep my kids off the internet at inappropriate times of day, and that's certainly going to directly impact that. Yeah,
it's a good example of unintended consequences, really. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions for Andy from anyone? I'll take silence as not. Okay. Thank you, Andy, and thanks for doing that on your first day back from vacation, and still being surprisingly familiar with the content. That was most impressive.
Quick 5-minute prep beforehand, yeah.
Marvelous. Right. Okay. Well, that brings us on to any other business. I guess we probably ought to firstly highlight that the sort of details are now out for the two interim, sort of virtual interim ADD sessions, which are in UK times 2 p.m. till 4:30 p.m. on Thursday, the 10th of September. For session 1, and then 2 p.m. till 4:30 p.m. on Tuesday the 15th of September for session 2, which I took it from that, Glenn, that you didn't have a whole bunch of people from Asia Pac.
Well, I also took it, since I'm going to be getting up at rather early to do run those sessions, that I really should have skewed the voting members more heavily towards Californians.
Good good point. That is pretty
I
early.
mean, I'll give the Asia Pac people, a break this time. I mean, we're going to try to, share the pain next time if we do another one of these, so it'll be probably very poor timing for you guys. But, certainly that was the time that got the most votes. And so we went with a very democratic approach of whoever got the most votes wins. So
that will never catch on as a concept.
Anyway,
apropos our earlier conversation, that's what happens when you live too far west.
And also we get fires and heat waves, so that's the other thing we get in California this week. So on those sessions, for the people who didn't feel like we had enough chat time during the IETF 108 session, you were going to get a lot of chat time to chat as much chat as you like. In particular, though, what I really like to focus on is, coming out of the 108 session, we had a couple of very good thoughts, like Chris Box put up on the list, hey, it seems like we're coming around to some, cohesion here around the need for requirements. I remember Ecker said that he agreed. There's other people that said they agreed. And so I think that, that work is something we should focus on over the next few weeks, so that when we meet the first session, we can really dig into it and have some extended conversation. And certainly there's other things floating on the table. I'm seeing a lot of conversation now being had around SVCB and some of the proposals out there, like Tommy Pauly has a proposal there for more oblivious DOE sort of approaches. And I think that's something we need to discuss, because I've been seeing some pro for it, but I've also started seeing some people, as they started reading through the drafts, are starting to go, oh my gosh, and rate might have for architecture. So I think getting those people in the next couple of weeks to really think through their positions and their views, do as much on lists as possible. And I realize a lot of people are on vacation these next few weeks, and you got kids that are going back to school like my kids are today, so it's causing some disruption. But let's have those conversations, and then hopefully we can have some in-depth, video based conversations, which are maybe a little better bandwidth than just email. So is Chris Box on the call today?
Yeah, I'm here, Glenn.
So Chris, do you want to say anything about what you're doing and try to waggle some people in to help you?
Yeah, so I was kind of waiting for the announcement of to the list of inviting people in, which I thought was in your court, Glenn. But
I can put that invite out.
Yeah. But yeah, I've based on the list of topics that I put in the email thread, which was in turn based on what was said at the meeting. I've turned that into just a skeleton draft, with the hope that other people will then say, yes, that's a good start, because we agreed to have a start that is a more limited subset of cases. And then for each of those, we can say, right, for these are some requirements that apply to these cases. So hopefully we can then use that to in turn generate solutions that match them.
So I have a block of calls this morning that run into the early afternoon, which is going to keep me busy. But when I get my head above water today, or maybe early tomorrow, I will drop a note out to the ADD lists, letting them know that there is a GitHub repo now set up for ADD. And Chris, I'll point them to you have the first document out there in it, so I can point them to yours as the main starting point.
Yeah, please do. Then we can get going. Unfortunately, I've got the next couple of days off, but
perfect time.
Hopefully, I can grab some time in the evenings, or the other way is it might go down as just tumbleweed, in which case it's not a problem.
Well, Chris, you have to wait a couple of days until you get your time off sorted out. It seems kind of cruel to when you have a little bit of time to suddenly say, and everybody go talk to Chris. So I mean, are you gone the whole week, or is it part of the week, or not to delve too personal?
No, I'm back on Thursday.
Okay, so I'll wait till Thursday, and then I'll put the nudge out then. That way,
okay, yeah,
you will have some private time to actually think instead of respond to ITF emails.
That would be a change.
Could I make a suggestion for these upcoming interim meetings? I think
no, you can't, Jim.
Yeah.
What?
I think it might be helpful to try and cull or rationalize all these ideas that are floating around. I mean, it's great we've got all these different ideas and suggestions being put forward, but one or two of them are sort of treading on each other's toes. And I think it might be helpful, again, to bring a bit more focus on top of what Chris has just been suggested, to try and rationalize some of these documents and maybe try and punt one or two of them by the wayside if they look, or they continue to look like being bad ideas. I think if we just have these things coming back and again and again and again, we're going to lose a little bit of focus.
So that's a good point, Jim. My hope is that the work that Chris is doing will help provide us that focus. Yeah. But I'll also say that, early on in the list, we sort of gave broad attention to things that were being put out there because people were throwing new ideas out, and that was very good, by the way.
Well, absolutely, yes.
To get a diversity up there. But, in the end, when these ideas float out there, if they basically hit the list and like it's crickets on that particular draft, I'm going to, as one of the working group chairs, take that as an indication of the interest that the group has in that particular topic. And so if a draft is getting crickets, it's just not going to get attention, right? And that's why I said in the announcement for these interims that, the agenda for the interim will be driven by the activity on the list heavily. And so, non-subtle hint, if you have a topic out there which you really think we need to talk about, get it on the list and get discussion going on it.
Yeah. I mean, what I was thinking, Glenn, I mean, this is for you and Dave get the big bucks, is maybe as working group chairs, you say to some of these authors, this idea doesn't seem to be going anywhere in your ID. Please don't persist with this unless there's some radical changes to what you've got in the document, or you get a level of working group support that hasn't already appeared. Don't just take over a V2, a V3 version of the ID just to keep it alive.
Yeah, no, understood, Jim.
Just let it die.
I'll also say that there's some coordination going on because, while the scope for ADD was very narrowly defined when we first created it, intentionally so by the ADs.
Yes.
We have been having conversations with the other DNS working groups because there's some drafts that are sort of floating out of them towards us, and some drafts that are in our area today that are sort of floating towards them. And so we are trying to figure out where the right fit for some of these drafts are. And so that I expect, and this is not going to just be done by fiat by the working group chairs, but by engagement with the authors and the working groups themselves as well.
Yeah,
I'm figuring out where some of these things fit.
That's been a particular problem for Daniel's documents. I think they've done the rounds of all three working groups now, and I think every working group said this is not for us. Take it there.
Yeah, well, and there's a little bit of that going on sometimes too. That's good old ITF stuff, right? Talk about my stuff, but take that other guy's stuff and put it someplace else.
Just one question, Glenn. I know for the original session a couple of weeks back, there wasn't time to cover all of the potential drafts, just because you couldn't physically fit them all in, which is a great problem to have. Clearly, some of those drafts that weren't covered may feel, or the authors of them may feel, somewhat of a disadvantage in terms of generating list interest in their papers. Did you and Dave have any thoughts about maybe giving them a little time at the first session just to sort of rebalance that, or are you leaving it to the authors to generate interest anyway?
Well, I would say Dave and I had not had that conversation yet, but I would say that part of, if you have a draft that you think is a good idea, regardless of what a working group chair or AD might do with it. It's always good to nudge people you think might have some comments on it off list and say, hey, what do you think of this? And could you comment on this, please? That is not, out of line, and I think it's something very reasonable for document authors to do. In particular, the other thing I do encourage people to do, and sorry, I've got my video off because I had to move from outside inside, and my lighting in here is terrible. If you have a draft out there and you've heard people make comments or you've seen people do similar work, reach out between yourself and another author and say, hey, we've got stuff that's, maybe not 100% aligned, but maybe, a little bit aligned. Can we have a call between us and chat and maybe, merge those efforts? Because, I think getting a good collection of IDs out there with ideas has been very good, and it shows a healthy working group. It's now the next phase where we start saying, let's consolidate some of these ideas and put them up for the working group and see what is taken off. And then that's the next step where we then actually see about what we start adopting as working group drafts and moving forward. And that's, I think, very much where we're at right now. So it is the time to go nudge people to comment on your draft if you think you have something really good to say out there. And it's not inappropriate as well to, if you have private input, do a quick update, a rev on your draft and put it up there and say, based upon, inputs and stuff like that, here's a rev of the draft. And it's even better if you can add an author or two, or at least people that have in the contributions list.
Okay, well, some excellent hints for people to think about over the next couple of weeks, because it'll be September before we know it, sadly.
But in the end, we have 5 hours of interim session to hash things out through, and it will be highly interactive. So we're not looking to have huge presentations. Obviously, some presentations are going to be needed to spark the discussion, but it's not just going to be presentation after presentation.
And for anyone that hasn't caught up with the invites yet, I think that it's WebEx for the interims, isn't it, Glenn?
It is. Yeah, we're going to use the ITF WebEx, and they will be recorded. So if you can't make the meeting, or if you make one but not the other one, they're going to be recorded and made available. I'm hopeful. I'm going to work with the ITF Secretariat to see if it will be possible to a quick turnaround, because I think they take about a week right now for between the WebEx records and then being posted. But I'll see if we get, for this particular one, get that session number 1 recorded and turned around pretty quickly, because we've got a Thursday to a Tuesday gap between them to give everybody a chance to look at notes, watch the replay, and come back ready to discuss on Thursday or on the Tuesday. And one last thing, Andrew, and I'll say this in the working group too. This is an important topic, and we all want to see it resolved, but we're also, making up new process a little bit here with these virtual meetings. We've got one hand tied behind our back because we don't have the ability to sit down in a comfy chair with a bunch of other people around a screen and discuss something, work out decisions. And so it's a slower process to get to consensus. It's a slower process to collaborate, and we just need to recognize that. And as well, be creative. And so if there's creative ways we can do collaboration better, give a shout. I'm always open to new crazy ideas.
Oh, I'm sure there's plenty of those floating around, if nothing else. Okay, just conscious of the time. Anyone got any questions on that or anything else that you want to raise before we wrap up today? Last chance for that. No. Okay, in which case, thanks everyone for your time. Much appreciated as always, and we'll speak again next week. See you all then.
Thank you.
Bye,
Thanks.
everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.